The old village of Gilboa was flooded because they made a dam to feed drinking water to New York City. And in the process of making that dam, they found lots of tree fossils. In 2010, the dam was, there was renovations on the dam, and the, I believe it's the New York Water Board, brought in a small team of paleobotanists to have a look at the site while they opened the quarry back up. And they cleaned out the quarry, and what they found, and what they didn't expect to find, was the forest floor, the original Devonian forest floor, which had imprints of all the positions of the trees. And so Bill Stein produced a map of the forest floor, which is an element that I have been looking at a lot in terms of making this project. And so I contacted Dr. Christopher Berry at Cardiff University, and he suggested that I just use the fossils. Why not just use the fossils for the glass? Because as far as his research was concerned, the fossils were made of the right kind of sand, and they had maybe interesting impurities such as pyrite and various sort of carbon inclusions, which might be, beneficial in terms of coloring glass. Which is one of the things I was very interested in the medieval forest glass, was that the colors were very much of the landscape and of the land, and made or produced by iron impurities in the sand. So that glass very much felt, close to landscape in a way that more contemporary glass maybe doesn't. Coming to Corning Museum of Glass, what I wanted to achieve was to make my own glass, in a nutshell. So create my own recipe for forest glass based on the traditional recipes and approaches to making materials, to collecting materials, to processing materials, and to mixing the glass, but obviously in a way that is adjusted to contemporary facilities. So I didn't have a set idea of what proportions of my own found materials would be used, and to what extent I would have to sort of draw on contemporary pre-bought base recipes. But as long as there was some trace elements that would actually interact with the glass recipe, I felt like that would be successful. And so I spent the first couple of weeks here testing different amounts of inclusions of fossil and potash. I did various experiments, so working with Jane Cook, the chief scientist here, to try and resolve a recipe which had enough of raw materials that I had collected to make a real difference in the recipe. So I wanted it to color the glass, and I wanted it to have an impact that was measurable in terms of the workability of the glass. So thinking about blowing beakers or blowing glass with raw stellano, so I love the waldglas beakers in the museum collection, and I go and look at them every day. And so what I wanted to do was kind of mirror the approach that we had to the recipe, which was it had elements of original recipes, but also contemporary elements. And so I very much tried to use that in the making of the forms and the beaker forms that I was using. For example, the kick in the bases of the beakers, which are this funny growth up in the center. That was used in medieval and late medieval glass as a stabilizer. So because they weren't always annealing the glass very well at that time, they had it as a strengthener of the form. So I decided that was a good sort of reference to the original forms, but in a contemporary sense, I've pared down, so there's no surface ornamentation, and there's no feet, there's no prunts, but what I have tried to do is use the scale of the waldglas original objects, so that there's those two elements that sort of reference historic tradition, but the works are very much set in a contemporary aesthetic. What I started to do was to look much more intensely at the map of the Gilboa fossil forest floor, and I started to look at the marks for the individual trees and how they were, the notations of the trees. And I took that into the hot shop, and Ross and I started to refer to it when making the beakers. So there was sort of a slight sort of size. It wasn't at all in an accurate, sort of cartographic way, but we were just making smaller and bigger beakers, thinking about specific notations of trees. And so we decided to keep going and making beakers to see how many of the trees we could mark with an object. And so from thinking about this very much as a object, as relic, it now is moving into a stage where there's the rondelle, which will be engraved probably with the map of the forest floor, but not thinking about it only as a map, but maybe thinking about it as a score, and a score for arranging the beakers. So the beakers will be arranged on the floor, marking out the growth patterns of the first forest on Earth. But obviously, those having been fully scaled trees, these will be small, delicate, transparent objects. So there's a sort of they are relics of that original forest, and they do contain that original forest, but in a very modest way.